So in this presentation, we're going to be looking at the issue of synchronous online guidance. So if we think back to what we looked at in previous weeks, we can think about this framework that I gave you for online careers provision. So we had the provision of information, the provision of access to automated interactions, and then various forms of offering communication, which I've broken down to one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-one, and many-to-many. But in fact, there are a lot more choices that you can make, as we discussed in previous weeks. Again, you can think about synchronous, which is what we're going to be thinking about today, or asynchronous, which is what you were all doing over the last module. But we've also got lots of other choices: text-based or multimedia, video or audio, this one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many division. Is the space that you're going to be doing online counselling or online guidance in, is it going to be open to everyone or closed? How long is it going to go on? How often are you going to do it? All of these things are decisions that you could potentially make. So let's focus in on the synchronous idea, because that's the kind of main idea we're going to look at today. So synchronous is existing or occurring at the same time as its definition. So what it means is that you're actually online with your client at the same time. That's essentially all we're talking about when we're talking about synchronous. You've got to be at your computer or your phone, they've got to be at their computer or their phone, and you're interacting during the same time period. So I'm going to look at three different versions of synchronous based online guidance today. The first one will be online video counselling or video guidance, online mentoring, and then text-based counselling. So let's start with video counselling as being the first approach that we'll look at. So if you're thinking about video-based guidance, then you'll need some kind of technology to do it. And you'll probably be familiar with quite a lot of these things from other kinds of contexts, perhaps talking to family, or perhaps being engaged in some kind of business meeting or whatever. And essentially most guidance, online guidance, is done through these kind of pre-existing technologies that are not specifically designed for guidance. So this might be about using tools like Skype or Skype for Business, WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, or perhaps there's a couple of new tools that I've seen, Viber and Talkie. Or you could use, in some cases, you might use bespoke technologies which are developed specifically for online education, counselling or guidance. In fact, it doesn't really matter which technology you use, as long as you're relatively familiar with that tool. It shouldn't be too difficult. Most of these things work mainly the same, regardless of which one you're using. So let's start with our basics. How do we make sure that we look professional? Well, the first thing is you want to be familiar with the technology that you're using, and you want to understand how it works. You want to close other programs on your computer and make sure that you've not got lots of emails coming in and so on while you're talking. You want to think about the location that you're sitting in. What's the person actually going to see when they're talking to you? You might want to have a bookcase behind you or something that makes you look professional, and think about the lighting as well. So I mean, actually here I've got a light behind me which is probably not ideal, so you might want to think about how you get the right lighting so that people can see you easily. You want to dress professionally, or dress in the same way you would if you were meeting someone actually face to face. Don't turn up wearing your pajamas or whatever. And then make eye contact and look directly into the camera when you can. Now you need to ensure that you're not interrupted and that there's no one else in the room when you're actually talking to someone. It's really, you're offering people, when you're doing guidance, you're offering people confidentiality, you're offering people privacy. And so if you've got a colleague or a spouse walking around behind you, that's not really what you're trying to achieve. And you also want to avoid taking notes onto the computer that you're using for the video interview, because this can be quite distracting. You get a kind of clicking noise if you do this. So then once you've got these kind of basics in place, you want to get some kind of contract in place with the person who you're talking to. So you should have sent the client something explaining how it's going to work. So you might want to talk about how long is it going to take, what technology they might need, Advise them that they'll need to find a private space for the session, just as you don't want people walking around behind you. They're not going to want that either, and you need to explain that that's important. Explain they shouldn't have other windows or applications open while they're talking to you. Again, they don't want to be distracted by emails. They want to be able to focus on what you're doing. Suggest they might want to bring something to take some notes onto. So it may be that they want to pencil and paper, or maybe they want to bring another device that they can take notes onto. Again, you don't really want them clicking onto the machine. Explain that also who you are and your approach. So you might want to say, well, I'm Tristram, I do narrative counselling, and that means the interview is going to work in this kind of way. And then explain that they can leave or make a complaint if they're not comfortable. So you do your kind of ethical stuff there as well. And then even if you've sent this to people, you want to begin the session by going through the issues as part of this contracting. You don't want to just assume that they've read it and then you just get straight on. Remind them of all these things because it's important that they engage with them. That's part of the contracting, but you'll then probably go on and do other things that you might normally do in contracting, like discussing what you're going to do, like discussing what they're looking to get out of the session and so on. Now, there are a number of challenges that you're likely to experience when you start to do video chat. So you certainly will find that you'll have issues with technology and connectivity. Don't be embarrassed about it. It happens to all of us. I think you can. There are a number of things you can do to help manage that. If things are really not working, call off and call back again can sometimes fix it. But also sometimes removing video and just doing it as audio. It's not ideal, but sometimes it can allow you to deal with connectivity problems. And you can't control these things because it's not just about your computers, it's also about the computer that the client is accessing this on. Now, although you have visual contact, and it's not actually the same as being in the same room, so you're likely to experience delays. You might say something, it might take a minute or a couple of seconds before the person hears it. You also can't, although I said, it's important to look at the camera, make eye contact, you want to be approachable, but you can't really make eye contact because you don't know quite where their eyes are. So it's very difficult. So it isn't quite the same. And actually your visibility of the client might be quite limited. The kind of setup that I've got here, you can just see my head and shoulders. So, for example, if you were in a room and somebody was very anxious, they might be fidgeting with their hands, tapping their feet up and down, that kind of thing. You would pick that up as a signal. If you're in a room with someone, you may not pick that up if you're on a video conference. So you can control the environment, your own environment to some extent. You can stop people coming in, you can set the lighting, you can set the background and so on. But you can't control your client's environment. Now, if you find that when you're trying to talk to your client, they've got, for example, their children running in and talking to them and so on, you're probably best to say, okay, well, deal with the thing you're dealing with. We can arrange another time. So you don't have to kind of keep going regardless of what's going on in their environment. If you think in your judgment it's not a suitable environment for doing some kind of guidance work for them to engage in the guidance you're doing, then stop the session and talk to them about that. Now, there are of course a few advantages as well of doing this, which I think are advantages over face-to-face. The first one's an obvious one, that you can offer guidance anytime and anywhere. They don't have to be able to come into your office. They can be on the other side of Norway and you can still be talking to them. Technology is widely available and it's pretty straightforward. You're not going to find it very, very difficult to use. You're not asking for any very detailed technical things for people to do. And you can also make use of some of the functionality in the tool. So you might want to send a link while you're talking to someone. You might want to have some resources that you plan to use. And a lot of these tools allow you to share your screen while you're actually talking to people, and that can be really useful. So for example, if you want to show them how a particular website or resource works, that can be really helpful. You can also have some opportunities to make sort of strategic use of preparation and follow-up. So as well as you can be prepared to Send somebody something while you're talking. Okay, have a look at this resource. Perhaps let's talk about this. Either by sharing a screen or just emailing something to them. You can also quickly be prepared to follow up. So as you're talking, you can make notes of things and then send them a follow-up straight after saying, here's the actions that we agreed, that kind of thing. So there are some things that I think are a bit easier when you're interacting with people online. And I think that probably the most obvious thing is that it really is very much like giving face-to-face guidance. You're not learning a whole load of new skills and approaches here. You can use most of what you've used. So let's move on. And by online mentoring, we're going to move on to think about something slightly different. So by online mentoring, I mean peer-to-peer learning and support. And so this could be you working with another guidance professional, which would, is a good thing, a useful thing for you to do. But what I'm thinking about primarily here is setting up peer support opportunities for your clients. So when we're talking about synchronous technologies, we might be thinking about us as a professional talking to a client, but we could also set up a peer learning environment, or we could set up an opportunity for, say, a young person to talk to somebody who's already working. This kind of thing, where it's not a professional interaction, but it's an opportunity for people to be mentored online. So what I've done here in an article that I wrote was to sort of establish a little process for online mentoring. So online, and I think some of this is quite relevant as well when you're thinking about online guidance. So at the start, you need to establish a relationship and then establish the purpose of the conversation. So for a guidance professional, you might refer to that as contracting. You want to, throughout the interaction, you want to be providing them with useful information and useful links. You want to refer them to appropriate services, provide prompt and relevant responses to questions that you're asked, encourage reflection on strengths and weaknesses, encourage career exploration, identify opportunities and explore how barriers can be overcome, then move the mentee progressively closer towards their goals, and ultimately you need some way of bringing this mentoring process to a close. So this gives us a kind of a process that we can use. We could use it in our guidance perhaps, but we also might want to use it if we're setting up interactions between our clients or our students and other people. So in this case, you actually need to teach the mentoring process to the people you're involving. You're playing a different role here from being the person online delivering guidance. You're somebody setting up an environment and encouraging people to interact in it. And if you're running online mentoring as a peer support activity, you'll need to teach this process to your clients and students and show them how they should interact in this way. Online mentoring, in my experience, doesn't just happen. It needs to be structured, supervised and supported. And as the professional, you have a key role in monitoring and ensuring it happens. So you're not doing the mentoring. In most cases, you're not doing the mentoring. You're encouraging others to do it, but you're helping them to think about how to do it, and then you're checking that it happens. So if we move on to the last of the approaches we're going to look at today, which is text-based counselling, we can see we've got some different challenges here. So the first thing is that there are different types of text-based chat. You may not know how people are accessing your text-based services. It's not as simple as saying, well, we could do phone-based texts or online or computer-based texts, because in fact, people will access the same application from different places. But I think what is worth thinking about is this a quick query type of service that you're trying to provide, or are you trying to deliver a full guidance interview online? And I think that's really important distinction to make. So if you're doing a quick query, these tend to be just a few interactions. They're typically based around a specific question. So someone might contact you and say, I'm thinking about becoming an accountant. Have you got any resources to send me? And it usually will result in the provision of either information and links or in some kind of referral. So you may say, well, look, okay, I'm sending you this information, but actually I think it'd be worth you coming in and talking to me about this. Or perhaps this is something which you don't want to it's not something that you're capable of dealing with, but you could send them to talk to somebody else. So it may be that they need to talk to their teacher or a counsellor or whatever. We then have more full text-based guidance interviews. Now this can be pretty challenging, but I think people are increasingly confident in working within text-based environments. And you obviously lose a lot of things that you might be used to. Whereas when we were looking at the video-based guidance interviews, we'd say, well, actually a lot of what you do face-to-face pretty much holds and you can still do online. But when you start to do text, you lose a lot of visual cues and non-verbal communication. And you might replace some of that with things like emojis and other text-based non-verbal communications, but it isn't really the same. So you've got to learn some new things. It will take you a while to get used to this. And there's some dangers in getting out of sync with your client. And also, it can be a very rapid interaction. It can be difficult to control. And that actually gets much more the case if you start to move up to do text-based guidance with more than one person. But let's focus on one person. So if you want to be effective in text-based guidance, I think you keep text short and to the point. Have some material prepared to ensure that you can get important points across. So you might want to have a Word document or something similar sitting to the side that you can use to copy and paste key links or bits of advice that you might want to say to people in. Make sure you pay attention to what your client is texting and to the subtext that you can pick up. It's not a race for you to say as much as you can. It may be better to let them talk. You can use sort of short prompts like go on, tell me more about that, things like that that you might want to say to get them to give you more information. Be prepared to wait and listen as well as to write. And if it gets beyond what you can handle in text, then feel free to refer people to other modes or to other services. It's not that you have to deal with everything. I mean, a real point of this course is that we're talking about integrated guidance. It's not just doing things in one mode, it's doing things across different modes. So as an example of that, one of the uses that where text can be very effectively used in careers learning and career guidance is to give sort of follow-up and supplemental interactions. So text can be used as part of your integrated service. You can remind people of appointments. You can remind people of what to bring or do before appointments. You can follow up after you've seen them. You can check in on them, so check that they're okay. Check up that they've done something that you've asked them to do. You can set deadlines and then remind them of those deadlines. And you can also remind people that you're still there. So if they haven't been in touch for a while and you think actually you're wondering how they're getting on, you can do that. But obviously, ultimately, the client has to control their engagement with the service, and so you want to be careful not to pester people. But these things can be very useful in terms of focusing their minds, but also reinforcing what you do in careers education or one-to-one career counselling. Here's a few references for you to have a look at. We've put them all on the reference list on the course as well. But to summarise, I think synchronous online guidance allows you to use a lot of the same tools that you're familiar with from face-to-face practice. However, there are important differences, and these are particularly marked with text-based guidance. And I think remember that you can think much more broadly than just a focus on one-to-one video conferencing, which is probably the obvious and first step. But you might want to get set up things like I've talked about in terms of peer mentoring, using online tools, and we'll go on and look in future modules at how you might do this in more group-based and e-learning type approaches. Now, I think some of the best uses are to integrate your synchronous guidance into wider services and find ways to do that. And to remember again that this is about integrated services where you may well move across modes in an interaction with an individual over a period of time. Thank you for listening. I hope that was useful. And here's my contact details.